The true measure of a structure isn't how it looks when the weather is clear, but how it holds up when a storm rolls in. For over 3 decades in heavy construction, my job was to spot the fractures before the roof caved in. I never imagined those decades of scanning blueprints would be required to survive a holiday invitation from my own family. It arrived 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, formatted like a corporate ultimatum sent directly to my wife's phone. A grueling schedule demanding 14 complex dishes for 25 corporate guests, requiring a brutal dawn start. Watching over my wife's shoulder, I knew instantly that this was a disaster waiting to happen. My wife, Natalie, spent nearly 30 years cultivating patience as a primary school teacher in our hometown. She is the sort of woman who remembers the specific struggles and triumphs of every child who ever crossed her threshold. Her entire life has been an exercise in absorbing the friction of the world so everyone else could coast along smoothly. Our son, Julian, inherited my methodical nature and became a materials engineer, building things meant to endure. 2 years ago he married Clara, a woman with sharp ambition and an unyielding conviction that her way was the absolute right way. Clara possessed a dangerous knack for turning gentle requests into mandatory assignments, leaving no room for anyone to decline. The boundary lines began eroding months ago, starting with minor, subtle assumptions that always fell squarely on Natalie's shoulders. Clara would send a casual text regarding an upcoming birthday, declaring how perfect Natalie's signature pot roast would be for 12 people. There was never an inquiry into our availability, just a smooth, pre-packaged expectation waiting at our doorstep. Natalie would spend hours preparing the feast, matching it with homemade side dishes and intricate desserts based on a passing comment Clara had made months prior. When dinner concluded, the appreciation was completely absent, replaced only by carefully staged social media photos where the food was cropped out. We watched the behavior escalate into a pattern that was impossible to ignore, yet we kept choosing the path of least resistance. When Julian and Clara decided to take an impromptu trip to the beach, they informed us of their dog-sitting needs just days before departure. I wanted to address the sheer entitlement of the request, but Natalie gave me that familiar, exhausted look that pleaded for peace. I allowed my better judgment to be overridden, choosing comfort over a necessary confrontation. That silence was my own personal failure, a quiet retreat that signaled to our kids that Natalie's boundaries were entirely negotiable. On a rainy Tuesday evening, the breaking point finally arrived in the form of an incredibly demanding text message. Clara forwarded a comprehensive catering menu that required multiple large turkeys, scratch-made stuffings, delicate pastries, and highly specific side dishes. The message concluded with a cold directive stating that the kitchen belonged entirely to Natalie for the duration of the holiday. It read exactly like a formal work order issued to an independent contractor rather than an invitation to a family celebration. Natalie stood in the living room, her posture rigid with an immediate, heavy silence that signaled a profound internal shift. I offered to intervene immediately, but Natalie stopped me with a quiet, fierce determination that I had rarely seen before. She typed a polite response suggesting they divide the massive workload, but Clara dismissed her concerns within 2 minutes. Clara insisted that Natalie was simply the expert at these things and that the rest of the family would be too busy managing the event setup. Natalie placed the phone face down on the counter, refusing to engage further with an argument that had already been decided for her. It was clear that my wife was being viewed as free labor to elevate Clara's social standing. The following Sunday, we gathered at Julian's house for a casual dinner featuring takeout food that required absolutely no effort from Clara. Natalie gracefully navigated the conversation toward Thanksgiving, proposing that they source the baked goods from a renowned local bakery to alleviate the burden. Clara laughed with a practiced, superficial warmth before patting Natalie's hand and telling her not to overthink her primary talent. Julian stared intently at his food, refusing to offer a single word of support for his mother. I watched my son abandon the principles of fairness I had spent his entire youth instilling in him. During the drive home, the tension in our car was thick enough to cut with a knife. I explicitly stated that the exploitation was officially over, refusing to let my wife endure a marathon cooking session alone. Natalie looked out into the darkness, a faint, knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she revealed she had already formulated a counter-strategy. She immediately contacted her lifelong friend Evelyn, who had retired to a quiet coastal town in Georgia years ago. Within 20 minutes, a brand new holiday plan had emerged, shifting our destination from a chaotic Ohio kitchen to a peaceful southern porch. The decision felt incredibly liberating, like a heavy weight being lifted from our shoulders after years of compliance. Natalie pulled out a legal pad, drafted a brief note, and placed it safely near her keys before booking our travel online. We secured early morning flights departing on Thanksgiving Day, fully committing to our sudden departure from the family script. Clara's demanding text messages continued to flood Natalie's inbox throughout the week, detailing meticulous instructions for every single dish. The messages revealed that Julian's corporate executives were attending, transforming what should have been a family meal into a strategic networking event. Clara was entirely convinced of her own leverage, assuming Natalie's traditional devotion would guarantee her compliance regardless of the emotional cost. Natalie responded to every single demanding directive with a short, polite confirmation, refusing to waste energy on someone who refused to listen. Our boarding passes were printed and waiting on the dresser, setting a definitive countdown for our quiet departure. 8 days before the holiday, Natalie visited Julian's house to drop off some tools and overheard Clara bragging on the phone about her seamless catering arrangements. It was the ultimate confirmation that our presence was valued only for the labor we could provide. 6 days before Thanksgiving, I bypassed Natalie's reservations and called Julian directly to demand accountability for the unfair arrangement. I laid out the sheer absurdity of the expectations placed on his mother, urging him to fix the situation before it was too late. Julian offered a hollow, rehearsed excuse, claiming everything was already arranged and downplaying the severity of the workload. I realized then that my son was merely echoing his wife's talking points, completely blind to the brewing storm. I ended the conversation firmly, letting him know we wouldn't be participating in a corporate showcase at Natalie's expense. The night before our flight, the house felt exceptionally quiet as we finalized our packing and prepared for the journey ahead. Natalie walked into the kitchen, picked up the handwritten note she had prepared days earlier, and smoothed it flat on the table. The letter stated clearly that while we loved him, we could not fulfill a massive catering demand alone and were heading south. She weighted the paper down with a small juice glass right in the center of the kitchen table, a quiet testament to our departure. We stood together in the dark kitchen, fully aware that the fallout from this choice would be monumental. Our dawn journey to the airport went smoothly, the quiet city streets offering a peaceful contrast to the impending family drama. As we boarded the aircraft, my phone buzzed with a final, oblivious text from Julian coordinating our arrival time for the morning prep work. I slipped the device into my pocket without replying, allowing the wheels to lift us away from the impossible expectations. Evelyn met us at the southern terminal with fresh coffee and an absolute lack of judgment, welcoming us into a completely different world. Her small, sun-drenched home was surrounded by vibrant greenery, offering the exact sanctuary my wife desperately needed. Julian eventually recounted the subsequent chaos to us in fractured, painful pieces over the following weeks. At 8 in the morning, Clara descended the stairs in a designer apron, ready to document a picturesque holiday preparation for her social circle. Instead, she encountered a dark, freezing kitchen, a completely empty counter, and a singular note resting beneath a glass. The realization of their total abandonment hit them instantly, triggering a frantic wave of unanswered phone calls and panicked text messages. Clara's sister arrived shortly after, utterly useless in the kitchen, while the clock ticked mercilessly toward the arrival of Julian's corporate superiors. By afternoon, the desperate couple was forced to scramble for any frozen or pre-prepared food left on the stripped grocery store shelves. They returned home with dry rotisserie chickens, instant potato packets, and a dented store-bought pie to serve to a high-profile executive. When the guests arrived, the immaculate table settings stood in stark contrast to the unappealing, lukewarm convenience food presented on fine china. Julian's boss maintained a polite, measured distance, while Clara offered a series of unconvincing lies about a sudden health crisis with the in-laws. The entire evening collapsed under the weight of its own deception, ending hours earlier than a traditional holiday gathering. Down south, we enjoyed a spectacular, unhurried meal on Evelyn's back porch, surrounded by the warm coastal air and genuine companionship. While we were finishing dinner, Clara's frantic call finally broke through, her voice trembling with intense anger and accusations of absolute selfishness. Natalie remained completely unbothered, calmly reminding Clara that we had communicated our boundaries multiple times without ever being heard. When Julian called a few moments later, the defensive arrogance had completely vanished from his voice, replaced by a quiet, genuine apology. He finally recognized the true cost of his silence, learning a harsh but necessary lesson about protecting the people who love him.